Summer of 1972. Frank Lucas controlled 116th Street. Nicky Barnes owned 112th. 4 blocks between them. 4 blocks that were about to turn into a war zone. But here's what nobody understood. This wasn't about territory. This wasn't about money. This was about something deeper. Respect. Legacy. Who would be remembered as the king of Harlem? Frank Lucas had the heroin game on lock. His blue magic was 98% pure, came straight from Southeast Asia, cut out the Italian middlemen. He was making $1 million a day, not a week, a day. Nicky Barnes was flashier. Designer suits, multiple girlfriends, driving a different luxury car every week. He called himself Mr. Untouchable. Had his face on the cover of the New York Times magazine. The feds couldn't touch him. Juries wouldn't convict him. Witnesses disappeared. 2 different styles, 2 different philosophies, same game, same streets. And Harlem wasn't big enough for both of them. July 3rd, 1972. That's when it started. That's when Nicky Barnes made his move. And what Frank Lucas said in response, just 6 words, ended everything before it even began. To understand what happened, you need to understand who these men really were. Frank Lucas wasn't from Harlem. He was from LaGrange, North Carolina. Small town, Jim Crow South. His cousin got killed by the Ku Klux Klan for looking at a white woman. Frank was 12 years old, watched it happen, and learned something that day. The system doesn't protect people like us, so you build your own system. He came to Harlem at 15. Found work as a driver, errand boy, gopher for the legendary Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson. Most kids would have stayed at the bottom. Frank studied. He watched Bumpy move, watched how Bumpy talked to the Italians, how he controlled territory without starting wars he couldn't win, how he thought 10 moves ahead. When Bumpy died in 1968, Frank saw an opportunity. The Italian mafia controlled the heroin supply. They cut it down, diluted it, taxed it at every level. By the time it hit Harlem, heroin was maybe 10% pure and cost a fortune. Frank had an idea. Cut out the middlemen, go directly to the source. Southeast Asia, the Golden Triangle, where the purest heroin in the world was being produced to fund the Vietnam War. He flew to Bangkok, met with suppliers, used military contacts, bribed officials, and started shipping heroin back to the United States in the coffins of dead American soldiers. Nobody checked the coffins. Nobody questioned them. His product hit the streets at 98% pure. He called it Blue Magic, packaged it in blue tape so people knew it was his, undercut everyone's prices, and still made massive profits. Within 2 years, Frank Lucas went from Bumpy's driver to the biggest heroin dealer in New York City. And he did it quietly. No flash, no attention, just business.
Nicky Barnes was the opposite. Everything Frank did in the shadows, Nicky did in the spotlight. Born in Harlem, learned the game from the streets, did time in Green Haven Correctional for dealing, came out with a network, a plan, and an ego the size of Manhattan. Nicky formed the Council, 7 major drug dealers who controlled different parts of Harlem. They met once a week, divided territory, set prices, settled disputes. It was organized crime, black organized crime, the first of its kind. And Nicky loved the attention, the expensive cars, the penthouse apartments, the custom suits, the beautiful women. He wanted everyone to know who he was, wanted the respect that came with fear. When New York Times Magazine put him on the cover in 1977 with the headline, Mr. Untouchable, Nicky had it framed, hung it in his living room. That's who he was, untouchable. But that attention came with a price. Every cop in New York knew his name. Every Fed wanted to take him down. And every dealer in Harlem either worked for him or wanted to replace him. Frank Lucas watched all this and shook his head. Too much flash, too much noise. That's not how you build something that lasts. By 1972, the tension was obvious. Frank and Nicky ran in the same circles, went to the same clubs, had mutual connections. But they weren't friends, weren't allies. They were competitors. Frank's blue magic was eating into Nicky's market share. People wanted the purer product, wanted the better high, and they didn't care about Nicky's reputation if Frank's product was better. Nicky's council started losing soldiers. Dealers were switching sides, wanted to sell blue magic instead, wanted the higher profit margins. May 1972, Nicky called a meeting with his council at his apartment on Central Park West, addressed the Frank Lucas problem directly. This country boy is costing us money. His product is better, I'll admit that, but he's operating without permission, without tribute, without respect for the structure we built. One of the council members, Guy Fisher, spoke up. So what do you want to do? Go to war with Frank Lucas? He's got the Italians nervous. You really want that heat? Nicky leaned back in his chair. I don't want war. I want compliance. Either he works with us, pays us a percentage, or he gets out. And if he refuses? Nicky smiled. Then we make it impossible for him to operate. That was the plan. Economic warfare. Hit Frank's supply lines, bribe his couriers, steal his shipments, make blue magic disappear from the streets, starve him out. It started small, a shipment intercepted, a courier roughed up, a stash house robbed. Frank knew exactly who was behind it. He didn't panic, didn't retaliate immediately. He watched, waited, calculated. July 3rd, 1972. Frank Lucas got a message. Nicky Barnes wanted to meet. Neutral ground, Small's Paradise, a jazz club on 7th Avenue, 10 p.m. Frank's people told him not to go, said it was a setup, said Nicky was going to try something. Frank went anyway, but not alone. He brought his brother, Huey, and two of his most trusted men. They arrived early, scoped out the exits, positioned themselves strategically. 10:15 p.m. Nicky walked in with four of his council members. Designer suit, alligator shoes, gold Rolex. He saw Frank sitting at a corner table and walked over slowly, deliberately. The club went quiet. Everyone knew who these men were. Everyone knew what this meeting meant. Nicky sat down across from Frank, didn't offer his hand, didn't smile, just stared. Frank Lucas, the invisible man of Harlem. Frank sipped his drink, didn't respond. You've been making moves, Nicky. Big moves, impressive. But you've been making them without talking to the people who run these streets. I run my streets, Frank said quietly. You run yours. That's not how this works. This is Harlem. There's a structure, a system. You can't just come in here and disrupt things because you got to connect in Thailand. Vietnam, Frank corrected. And I'm not disrupting anything. I'm providing a superior product at a better price. That's called competition. Nicky leaned forward. Competition implies we're equals. We're not. I've been doing this since you were driving Bumpy around. Frank met his eyes. Bumpy taught me more than you'll ever know. Bumpy's dead. His lessons aren't. The tension was thick. Nicky's men shifted, ready for anything. Frank's men did the same. Nicky took a breath, tried a different approach. Look, I didn't come here to disrespect you. I came here with an opportunity. Work with the council, pool our resources, your supply, our distribution network. We'd be unstoppable. And what do I get? Protection, legitimacy, a seat at the table. I don't need protection. I don't want legitimacy. And I built my own table. Nicky's jaw tightened. Then you're gonna have problems. Big problems. Shipments disappearing. Dealers getting arrested. Product getting seized. You think the cops aren't on my payroll? Frank set his drink down slowly. You threatening me, Nicky? I'm explaining reality. Frank stood up. The entire club watched.
Nicky's men reached for their weapons, but Nicky held up his hand, stopped them. Frank buttoned his jacket, looked down at Nicky Barnes, and said 6 words that ended everything. "I don't break. I bury."
Silence. Complete silence. Not just at the table, the entire club. Even the jazz band stopped playing. Nicky stared up at Frank, trying to read him, trying to see if it was a bluff. It wasn't. Frank turned and walked out. His men followed, left Nicky sitting there with his counsel in front of the entire club, looking like he'd just been dismissed. Guy Fisher leaned over. "Boss, we can't let that slide. Everyone saw that." Nicky didn't respond immediately. He was thinking, processing, because what Frank had just said wasn't a threat. It was a promise. And men like Frank Lucas didn't make promises they couldn't keep. The next 48 hours were crucial. Nicky had to respond. His reputation demanded it. But how? He called an emergency council meeting, debated their options, hit Frank's operation hard, make an example, show Harlem who really ran things. But then something happened that changed everything. July 5th, 1972. One of Nicky's major stash houses in the Bronx got raided, not by cops, by Frank's people. They didn't steal the product, they didn't hurt anyone. They just walked in, took inventory, and left a note. "You have 72 hours to stop, or I bury you in product so pure your customers won't even remember your name." Nicky understood immediately. Frank wasn't threatening violence, he was threatening economics. He was going to flood the market with blue magic at prices so low that Nicky's operation would collapse. And Frank could do it. He had the supply, he had the distribution, he had the will. That same day, Nicky got a call from one of his Italian connections, a capo in the Genovese family. The conversation was brief. "Nicky, we got a problem. Your war with Frank Lucas, it's bad for business, our business. You need to back off. He's cutting into my territory. He's cutting into everyone's territory, but he's also got connects we don't have. And if you push him, he'll push back, and everyone loses, including us." "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying leave Frank Lucas alone. Find another way to make your money, or you'll find yourself without our protection." That was it. The Italians had spoken. They weren't going to back Nicky in a war with Frank, because Frank had proven he was too valuable, too connected, too dangerous. Nicky Barnes had a choice: escalate and lose everything, or back down and keep his empire intact. July 8, 1972. Nicky sent word through intermediaries. The pressure on Frank's operations stopped immediately. No more intercepted shipments, no more roughed-up couriers. Nothing. Frank got the message, understood, but he didn't forget. For the next 5 years, Frank Lucas and Nicky Barnes operated in an uneasy truce. They crossed paths occasionally, were civil, professional, but never friends. Frank kept doing what he did, quiet, strategic, building wealth without the flash. Nicky kept being Mr. Untouchable, until he wasn't. Federal prosecutors finally got Nicky on RICO charges, life sentence, and when he realized his counsel had betrayed him, stolen from him, slept with his women while he was locked up, Nicky did something nobody expected. He became an informant, flipped, gave up everyone, the counsel, his suppliers, his corrupt cops. Over 100 people went to prison because of Nicky Barnes's testimony. Frank Lucas got caught in 1975, wore a chinchilla coat to the Muhammad Ali versus Joe Frazier fight, sat ringside, drew too much attention. The feds noticed, started investigating, found everything. Frank also became an informant, gave up corrupt cops in the NYPD. His testimony led to dozens of arrests, exposed a network of corruption that went all the way to the top. Both men ended up in witness protection. Both men destroyed the empires they'd built. Both men lived long enough to see themselves become exactly what they'd hated: snitches. But here's the thing about that night at Small's Paradise, that moment when Frank Lucas stood up and said those 5 words: "I don't break, I bury." It wasn't just about Nicky Barnes. It was about principle, about drawing a line, about refusing to bow to anyone, even when it would have been easier, safer, more profitable. Frank understood something that Nicky didn't. Respect isn't given because you're flashy, isn't given because you're on magazine covers, isn't given because you call yourself untouchable. Respect is earned by backing up every word you say with action, by being willing to lose everything to maintain your integrity, by proving that you mean what you say every single time. Nicky wanted to be feared, Frank wanted to be effective, and in the game they were playing, effective always beats fearsome. Years later, after both men were in witness protection, a journalist asked Frank about that night, about what he was thinking when he said those 6 words to Nicky Barnes. Frank smiled. "I was thinking that Nicky had forgotten the first rule of this game: never threaten someone who has less to lose than you do. I grew up with nothing, built something from nothing, and I could go back to nothing if I had to. Could Nicky? Could he strip away the cars, the suits, the women, the reputation, and still be Nicky Barnes? I didn't think so."
And if he'd called your bluff? Frank's smile faded. "It wasn't a bluff. I'd have buried him in product until his operation choked, would have lost money doing it, would have started a war, but I'd have done it. Because once you show weakness in this game, you're finished." Nicky blinked first. That's why he lost. So what really happened after that meeting? Did Frank really raid Nicky's stash house? Did the Italians really call Nicky off? Some of it's legend, some of it's myth, but here's what we know for certain. After July 1972, Nicky Barnes never moved against Frank Lucas again. They operated separately, occasionally cooperated when it benefited both, but Nicky never tried to force Frank into the council. Frank's operation continued to grow. His blue magic dominated the market until his arrest in 1975. And those 6 words became part of Harlem legend: "I don't break, I bury." Drug dealers quoted it, used it, tried to embody it, because it represented something they all wanted: power that doesn't need to be explained, strength that doesn't need to be proven, the kind of respect that comes from being absolutely certain of who you are and what you're capable of. Whether it ended a war or prevented one from starting, the result was the same: 2 kings of Harlem, 4 blocks between them, and an understanding that some battles aren't worth fighting. If this story hit you, smash that subscribe button. We're telling the Frank Lucas stories they don't teach in history class, the moments that made him a legend, the choices that defined him, the words that shook Harlem. Drop a like if you think Frank Lucas was smarter than Nicky Barnes, and in the comments, tell me, what would you have done if you were Nicky? Would you have backed down, or would you have gone to war? More legendary stories dropping soon. Don't miss it.